In the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, moments before a heated confrontation would shake the family to its core, King Charles did something no one expected. Kate stood there, silent, composed, but clearly hurt, while Camilla's voice echoed down the hall, sharp enough to cut through the tension. And yet, Charles didn't waver. For the first time in years, his loyalty was unmistakable. He stepped forward, not as a monarch, but as a father-in-law defending the woman he believed had been wronged. What happened next left the entire palace frozen. Before we dive deeper into this emotional royal moment, hit that like button, subscribe if you love real royal family stories, and share this video with someone who follows palace drama as closely as you do. It helps more than you think. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the end of this one. The walls of Buckingham Palace have witnessed centuries of secrets, but few moments carry the quiet tension that had been building between Kate and Camilla. It didn't start with a dramatic explosion or a single unforgivable act. It started with whispers, subtle glances across long dining tables, quiet dismissals during official engagements, moments that seemed harmless from afar, but carried weight for those inside the royal circle. Kate had always carried herself with grace. Even in the face of pressure only a handful of people in the world could understand. Becoming the Princess of Wales wasn't simply a title. It came with expectations, traditions, and the shadow of a legacy that still hovered in the public mind. Diana's memory lived everywhere in the palace. In the portraits, the humanitarian work, the way the public adored Kate for her warmth and sincerity. And for some, that admiration felt like a reminder they could never escape. Camilla, now queen consort, had carved her own path through years of criticism and judgment. She knew the weight of public scrutiny better than anyone. But as Kate's popularity soared, even more after a quiet resilience during recent family changes, Camilla sensed a shift. It wasn't spoken out loud, but the palace staff could feel it. Two powerful women navigating the same space, each carrying different histories and expectations. What made things more complicated was Kate's nature. She wasn't confrontational. She didn't raise her voice. She chose silence over conflict, which in the palace could be interpreted in many ways. To the public, silence made her look calm, elegant. But to Camilla, silence sometimes felt like superiority, whether intended or not. And that unspoken tension grew with every small misunderstanding. One cold morning, things took a sharper turn. A private meeting had been scheduled between senior members of the family regarding upcoming charitable initiatives. Kate entered the room early, setting her notes down, her mind already focused on the children's mental health campaign she had been developing for months. It was a project deeply personal to her, one she had built from scratch, working with experts, listening to families, and designing programs that would actually help. When Camilla walked in, she glanced at the papers spread across the table. Her eyes narrowed for a moment before she offered a polite smile. But that smile didn't reach her eyes. "Another youth initiative?" she asked lightly, though the edge in her voice was unmistakable. Kate nodded gently. "Yes, we've been seeing great progress." The response has been... Camilla interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. "Well, to keep it simple, the public doesn't always understand these complicated things." The room went still for a heartbeat. Kate paused, choosing her words carefully. "It's important we don't underestimate people. They're engaged. They want to understand." Camilla said nothing, but the tension sat between them like an invisible wall. Those who witnessed the exchange spoke about it quietly later, not because it was dramatic, but because it revealed something deeper. Camilla wasn't comfortable with how seamlessly Kate connected with the public, effortlessly, naturally, in ways that seemed impossible to replicate. Another moment came weeks later during a royal engagement. Cameras flashed as the family stepped out for a charity gala. Kate greeted guests warmly, her genuine smile lighting up the room. Camilla stood nearby, speaking with another group, but occasionally glancing over her shoulder. Every time Kate laughed softly with guests or knelt to speak to a child, eyes turned toward her. Cameras clicked, whispers stirred. The spotlight felt uneven. After the event, inside the palace, Camilla made a brief comment to Charles. "She's becoming too prominent." Charles didn't reply immediately. He simply adjusted his cufflinks and said, "She's doing her duty." But even he noticed the atmosphere shifting. Among the guards, staff, and those who worked closely with the family, there were murmurs. "Her Majesty doesn't seem pleased lately," one footman whispered, "especially around the princess." Another nodded in agreement. You can almost feel it when they walk into the same room. Still, Kate continued her work with quiet dedication, refusing to let tensions interfere with what mattered most. That only fueled the divide further. Camilla wanted acknowledgement, perhaps even deference, but Kate wasn't playing any political game. She wasn't trying to overshadow anyone. She was simply being herself. And sometimes, being yourself is enough to stir resentment in those who feel threatened. The real turning point came during a private luncheon in the palace. A conversation about future public appearances quickly grew uncomfortable. Camilla suggested modifying the schedule so she could take on more high-profile engagements. Kate, polite as always, agreed. But when she mentioned that children's charities were requesting her specifically, Camilla's expression tightened. "Of course they are," she said with a cool smile. "Everyone wants a princess." There it was, the first openly bitter remark. Kate's eyes softened, not with offense but with quiet disappointment. She didn't want this rivalry. She had never wanted it. But the palace staff noticed the shift instantly. From that day, the tension climbed. Small disagreements turned into icy silences. Polite exchanges began carrying hidden meanings. Kate remained patient, composed, unwilling to let negativity dictate her behavior. But the strain was growing visible. What made it worse was that William sensed it too. He worried for Kate. He knew the pressure she faced, and the last thing he wanted was for her to feel isolated inside the very home she was supposed to be protected in. Meanwhile, Charles observed everything quietly. He had spent decades navigating royal politics. But this was different. It wasn't about titles or duties. It was emotional. It was personal. And every day, the distance between Kate and Camilla grew more impossible to ignore. Yet the palace, with its grand halls and polished surfaces, kept everything looking perfect from the outside. No one beyond the gates had any idea of the storm quietly building, one that would soon erupt in a way no one expected. No one anticipated the moment when Camilla's temper would finally snap. Nor did anyone imagine that the one person to break the cycle of silence would be Charles himself. The palace was heading toward a confrontation, and every guard, every advisor, every family member could feel approaching like a shift in the air before a thunderstorm. And when the storm finally hit, it would change everything. The palace had seen tension before, but nothing like the quiet storm forming on this particular evening. It was meant to be an ordinary meeting, simple planning, routine updates, nothing more. But beneath the polished floors and gilded ceilings, emotion simmered dangerously close to the surface. Kate arrived first, her step soft, her posture calm. She carried a folder under her arm, filled with notes for upcoming charity events. The guards noticed that gentle smile she always wore, even when tired. She was respectful to everyone, footmen, housemaids, security. It was one of the many reasons people were drawn to her. Moments later, Camilla entered, and the temperature of the room seemed to shift. The queen consort's expression was tight, jaw clenched ever so slightly. She paused when she saw Kate standing near the window, reviewing her notes. "You're early," Camilla said, her tone neutral, too neutral. Kate turned, offering a polite smile. "Just preparing for the briefing. I thought it might help us get through everything smoothly." Camilla stepped closer, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "You always do like being prepared." The words were simple, but the tone carried a sting. One Kate had heard before, one she chose to ignore. She nodded gently and continued sorting her papers. But Camilla wasn't looking at the papers. She was watching Kate, watching the ease, the quiet confidence, the natural grace that seemed to surround her effortlessly. It irritated her in a way she hated to acknowledge. Minutes ticked by. William and Charles joined them, trying to keep the meeting balanced. But there was an invisible thin line stretched across the room. One misstep, and it would snap. The first crack came when Charles asked Kate about her project. "Your presentation on the youth initiative. Would you like to start?" he asked. Kate nodded and stepped forward, clicking through slides on the screen. She spoke softly but with passion, outlining goals, timelines, and partners. She mentioned families she'd met, the young teenagers who had inspired her work. The more she spoke, the more Camilla's expression hardened. Finally, Camilla interrupted. "Is all that really necessary?" she asked, cutting through Kate's explanation. "You're making it sound far more complicated than it needs to be." Kate blinked, surprised. The room went still. "I believe the details matter," Kate replied gently. "It helps us understand the impact." Camilla allowed a short breath, half laugh, half scoff. Impact. Everything these days is about impact. You do realize not every charity event has to be, what do you call it, transformational? William's jaw tightened. Charles looked between them, sensing the tension rising fast. But Kate didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend herself aggressively. She simply said, "The families deserve thorough work." That should have been the end of it. But Camilla's simmering frustration, built over months of growing jealousy and insecurity, broke through her restraint. "Oh, please," she snapped suddenly, louder than anyone expected. "Don't pretend you're the only one who cares. Don't stand there acting as if you're above everyone simply because the public adores you." The words echoed like a slap across the room. Kate froze. William stepped closer, instinctively. Charles lifted his head sharply. Camilla wasn't done. "You think your silence makes you noble," she continued, voice rising. "It makes you manipulative. You sit there with that innocent look, while everyone bends over backward for you." Kate's breath caught, not because of the volume, not because of the anger, but because she had never imagined hearing such accusations inside the royal family. William stepped forward. "That's enough." But Camilla ignored him. "You walk around as if Diana herself appointed you heir to her legacy," she hissed, as if... Her voice cracked, the emotion crossing into something raw and uncontrolled. Kate stood completely still, eyes lowered. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She didn't defend herself. And that stillness, that grace under attack, only fueled Camilla's fury further. "You see," Camilla demanded, pointing at Kate as if she were on trial. This silence, it's her weapon." The room felt smaller, tighter. The guards outside exchanged glances at the rising voices. Charles rose slowly from his seat. Everyone stopped, even Camilla. He didn't shout. He didn't gesture. He simply stood, and the weight of decades of royal authority settled across the room like a sudden shadow. "You will not," he said quietly, "speak to her that way." Camilla's eyes widened. "Charles." But he continued, his voice soft but unshakable. "This is not how we address members of this family. This is not how we treat one another." Camilla looked stunned, truly stunned. She had expected William to intervene, maybe even Kate to finally fight back. But Charles? Charles had never taken a stance like this before. "Are you defending her over me?" Camilla whispered, voice trembling between anger and betrayal. Charles exhaled, steady and controlled. "I am defending what is right." Kate's eyes softened, not with victory, but with sorrow. She never wanted this clash. She never wanted to be the center of a storm between them, but there was no stopping it now. Camilla stepped back, breath unsteady. Her anger was shifting into confusion, hurt, shock. She couldn't understand why Charles wasn't standing beside her, why he wasn't echoing her frustrations, why he wasn't angry on her behalf. Kate, quiet as always, finally lifted her gaze. "I'm not your enemy," she said softly. The vulnerability in her voice struck the room like a blow. For the first time, Camilla's face faltered. Charles stepped forward, the calm center of the chaos. "This ends here," he said, each word crystal clear. "We will not continue like this. Not in this family." Silence fell. Thick, heavy, meaningful. The confrontation had ended, but its echo would ripple through every corridor of the palace. Nothing would be the same again. For a long moment, no one breathed. The confrontation had erupted so quickly, Camilla's voice sharp, Kate's silence steady. The room charged like the moment before lightning splits the sky. But what followed was something the palace had never seen before. Not from Charles. Not in this way. He stood between them, not with anger, but with a calm intensity that froze everything around him. The guards outside the door sensed the shift instantly. Staff members standing nearby exchanged looks, unsure they should step closer or disappear entirely. Even the air felt heavier, as though the palace itself was listening. Kate didn't speak. Her eyes stayed on the floor, her expression composed, almost too calm for the moment. She wasn't avoiding confrontation. She simply refused to fuel it, and that restraint made the tension cut deeper. Camilla, still fuming, tried to regain control of the moment. "I will not be dismissed in my own home," she snapped, her voice echoing harshly off the walls. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His next words were delivered with a softness that carried more force than shouting ever could. "This isn't about the home," he said quietly. "This is about how we treat one another." The room stilled even further. Camilla blinked, caught off guard by the tone. Steady, firm, protective. "I'm simply making my point," she insisted. She stands there like she's innocent, but her silence speaks volumes. Charles inhaled slowly. "Her silence," he said, "is dignity." That single phrase changed the entire atmosphere. Even Kate lifted her gaze, surprised. Charles wasn't a man known for dramatic defenses or impassioned speeches. He chose diplomacy, caution, gentle navigation. But today, something inside him had shifted, maybe slowly, maybe over months, and it rose to the surface now, fully formed. Camilla stared at him, disbelief flickering across her face. "You're taking her side?" Charles's eyes softened, but there was no hesitation in his reply. "I am taking the side of what is right." The words were steady, grounded, the kind of sentence that comes from a truth someone has been carrying quietly for far too long. Kate didn't flinch. William, standing behind her, caught her eye with the smallest, most reassuring nod. He knew this was bigger than a disagreement. This was about fairness, about respect, about choosing not to let unspoken resentment become poison. Camilla wasn't finished. "I have done everything to earn my place," she said sharply. "And she stands here barely saying a word, letting the world adore her as if she's..." "Enough," Charles said gently, but with unmistakable finality. That one word did more to silence the room than any argument. Camilla pressed her lips together. The guards outside the doors exchanged stunned glances. No one had heard Charles speak like this to anyone, let alone the Queen Consort. He turned toward Kate for the first time fully, his expression softening. "You have done nothing wrong," he said. "You have carried yourself with grace. Under pressure, many would crumble beneath." Kate didn't say anything. She simply nodded once, her gratitude quiet but unmistakable. But Charles wasn't finished. He looked between them. Two women tied to him in different ways, two lives that had shaped the royal world differently. "We cannot," he said slowly, "allow personal frustrations to overshadow the respect this family should stand for." Camilla stared at him, stunned. Her anger began to shift into something else. Hurt, disbelief, maybe even fear that the dynamic had changed permanently. "It was not my intention," she began. Charles raised a hand gently. "But intention does not erase impact." The words landed heavily. Kate felt them. William felt them. Even the guards outside the door felt the shift in the air. The king's voice remained controlled, but it carried a weight Camilla couldn't ignore. Kate has always acted with integrity. Even when she is hurt, she chooses silence over conflict. That is not something to criticize. His gaze softened. It is something to learn from. Camilla's breathing grew shallow. Her eyes darted from Charles to Kate, and for the first time, she truly seemed to see how the confrontation appeared from the outside. The rawness of the moment forced her to face something she'd buried under frustration and jealousy for months. "Are you saying I'm the problem?" she whispered. Charles stepped closer, his expression calm. "I am saying this family has enough battles outside these walls. We do not need them within as well." There was no malice, no accusation, just truth. And sometimes truth is the loudest voice in the room. Camilla didn't reply. Her shoulders lowered, the initial fire dimming. But she wasn't ready to apologize, not yet. The silence stretched between them, fragile and uncertain. Kate finally spoke, her voice soft. "I don't want conflict." Camilla glanced at her, surprised to hear her speak at all. "I never have," Kate continued. "We're family, and I believe we can treat each other like one." She paused. "I don't want to be your rival." It wasn't a dramatic speech. It wasn't emotional or pleading. It was calm, sincere, the way Kate had always navigated palace life. And that sincerity hit deeper than any argument could. Charles breathed out slowly, relief flickering in his expression. "That," he said softly, "is why I stood up today." William slid a supportive hand along Kate's back, pride in his expression. He, more than anyone, knew the strength it took for her to speak in moments like these. Camilla looked at Kate, not with anger this time, but with something complicated. Something she wasn't ready to name. Jealousy? Shame? Maybe a realization that the battle she had been fighting was one she created in her mind. Still, she said nothing. Charles took a final breath, grounding the moment. "We will move forward," he said. "But not like this. Not with resentment." He didn't command. He didn't scold. He simply set a boundary, something the family needed far more than they realized. The tension in the room began to dissolve, slowly but noticeably. The air felt lighter, though not fully healed. Not yet, but something important had shifted. The silence that once protected bitterness had been broken, not by anger, but by loyalty. A father-in-law choosing what was right. A princess choosing grace. A queen forced to confront her reflection. Outside the room, the guards exchanged glances. They felt the energy change instantly. Something rare had happened. Something the palace would remember quietly, even if the outside world never knew. Kate exhaled gently, shoulders relaxing. Charles gave her a small, supportive nod, a silent assurance that she wasn't alone anymore. And though the confrontation was over, its impact was only beginning, because what Charles said would echo through the palace, reshaping alliances, softening long-held tensions, and proving one quiet, undeniable truth. Sometimes loyalty is quiet. Sometimes loyalty is gentle. But when spoken at the right moment, it can change everything. The echoes of the confrontation didn't fade quickly. Even after the voices quieted and the meeting dispersed, Buckingham Palace felt different, charged with invisible electricity, as if the air itself had recorded every word, every breath, every moment of tension. When the doors finally opened, the guards straightened instantly. They had heard the raised voices, the sudden silence afterward, the unmistakable shift inside. But as always, they kept their faces neutral, their posture firm. Still, the knowledge lingered between them silently. Something monumental had just happened. Kate stepped out first. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't flustered. But the guards noticed something softened in her expression, something tired. She gave him a polite nod, the same warm courtesy she showed every day. But today it carried a weight that didn't go unnoticed. William walked close behind her, his hand resting lightly on her back in quiet support. His jaw was tight, his eyes determined. He wasn't angry at Kate. He was angry at the situation, at the pressure, at the unspoken battles she kept enduring. A man doesn't have to shout to show his protectiveness. Sometimes it's instead of his shoulders, the way he watches over the woman he loves. Behind them, Charles exited the room with a heaviness unlike anything the palace staff had seen from him. It wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't defeat. It was the weight of responsibility, of having spoken a truth that had been held inside for too long. The kind of truth that changes relationships forever. And Camilla, she remained inside the meeting room for a long time. The door was half open, her silhouette visible from a hallway. She wasn't composed. She wasn't regal. She looked shaken, caught between the anger she had expressed and the realization of how far things had gone. Her pride had taken a blow she never expected. For a woman who had fought for decades to gain acceptance, being corrected publicly, especially by Charles, landed deeper than she could admit. One of the senior advisors quietly closed the door to give her privacy. The palace itself seemed to exhale after the confrontation, as if centuries of tradition and pressure had tightened and then suddenly released. Servants moved more cautiously, speaking in hushed tones. Guards exchanged subtle glances. Even the echo of footsteps along the halls felt different, slower, more deliberate. Word didn't spread outward, but it spread inward. A lady in waiting whispered to another in the corridor. The king defended the princess. Firmly. A footman shook his head. It felt historic. A royal aide murmured, "I've never seen Camilla so shaken." Everyone felt the shift, an invisible recalibration of the family's emotional hierarchy. But while the palace murmured, Kate chose silence. When she reached her private sitting room, she settled into a chair, her hands clasped gently. She wasn't thinking about victory or validation. She was thinking about peace, how to restore it, how to move forward without leaving wounds that could widen over time. William knelt beside her. "You handled yourself with more grace than anyone could." She offered a faint smile. "I don't want this to become something larger." He nodded. "But we can't keep pretending the tension does exist." She looked at him, eyes soft. "I just don't want to be the reason the family fractures." "You're not," he said firmly. "You never were." William meant every word, and Kate felt it. But she also knew a truth people often forget. Tension doesn't always come from big moments. Sometimes it grows from misunderstandings, insecurities, unspoken comparisons, all the small things that slowly turn into something sharp. Meanwhile, Charles retreated to his private study. He didn't sit right away. He walked slowly to the window, overlooking the gardens. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in muted gold. For a moment, he closed his eyes. He wasn't regretting what he said. He knew it was necessary, but he did feel the weight of what it meant. Standing up for Kate meant acknowledging a fracture he had been avoiding for months. It meant choosing fairness over comfort, truth over peace. And while he didn't regret it, he knew Camilla had been wounded by the moment more deeply than she initially showed. He also knew Kate didn't want conflict, and that weighed on him too. Later that night, when Charles finally approached Camilla's room, the air between them was still sharp. She sat by her vanity, head lowered, fingers tracing the edge of a handkerchief. When she looked up, her eyes weren't angry. They were tired. "Do you think I'm cruel?" she asked quietly. Charles paused. "No, I think you're overwhelmed." Camilla's voice cracked slightly. "You defended her." "I defended fairness," he said gently. "And you know that." She looked away. "It feels like you chose her over me." He sat beside her, placing a hand over hers. "I chose unity and dignity and what this family must represent." Camilla didn't reply immediately. For a woman who had fought her whole life for acceptance, the idea that she could be the one causing tension frightened her. But admitting that required vulnerability she wasn't ready to show, not yet. Meanwhile, the following morning carried a different atmosphere. The palace corridors seemed quieter, as if everyone sensed the aftermath settling in. But subtle changes were already visible. A footman noticed Camilla walk past with a slower step than usual. Not defeated, reflective. Kate, during breakfast, was gentler than usual with the staff, thanking them more than once, her tone soft but sincere. The confrontation hadn't hardened her. It softened her further, reminding everyone why the public adored her. William stood beside her like a shield, calm but alert, making it clear without saying a word that he wouldn't allow anyone to unsettle her again. And Charles, he carried himself differently too. Not heavier, not burdened, but certain, firm, like a man who had finally said what needed to be said. By afternoon, the staff could feel beginnings of repair. Camilla stopped by Charles's study, not to argue, but simply to sit with him. Their silence was intense. It was thoughtful. She wasn't ready to apologize, and he wasn't expecting her to. But the crack between them was no longer widening. It had paused, waiting for healing. Kate spent time in the garden with Charlotte and George, their laughter drifting across the lawn. The guards, watching from a distance, exchanged small smiles. Children have a way of dissolving heaviness, and the palace needed that sound more than ever. William joined them later, lifting Louis into his arms, the four of them walking through the gardens like any ordinary family. The sight was simple, but to the staff watching secretly from windows, it was a reminder. Despite the drama, the heart of the monarchy was still intact. And somewhere deep in the palace, Camilla watched them through a window for a long, long moment. Her expression wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't jealousy either. It was complicated, an emotional mixture of realization, insecurity, and maybe even admiration. The confrontation had exposed wounds, but it also revealed something undeniable. Kate wasn't trying to win anything. She wasn't trying to overshadow anyone. She was simply being herself. And that authenticity, quiet, steady, unshaken, was what finally began shifting the palace's emotional landscape. By nightfall, something remarkable had happened. The palace wasn't fractured. It was recalibrating. Relationships were shifting, yes. Boundaries had been drawn. Truth had been spoken aloud after months of silent tension. But healing had begun too, slowly, quietly, the way most real healing starts. And though the world outside Buckingham Palace would never know the details, those inside the walls would remember this moment forever. The day loyalty spoke louder than silence. The day Charles chose fairness over fear. The day Kate's dignity revealed the strength of her character. And the day the royal family discovered that sometimes the most powerful change comes not from battles, but from truth.